Hi, I'm Chris, and in this tutorial we're going to be making a first-person adventure game using Adventure Creator for Unity. This is going to be done with Adventure Creator 1.55 and Unity 5.3.4, I believe. Let me just check, 5.3.4, although it should work with any officially released version of Unity so far. So, this is going to be focusing on features that are specific to first-person games and physics games for more of a thorough, in-depth look at more standard things like hotspots and interactions. Have a look at the 2D and 3D tutorial videos as they go into sort of much more, we'll be going to much more detail on the way that the fundamentals of Adventure Creator work across all types of games. So we will be covering things like hotspots and inventory in this tutorial, but we might skim over them a little bit more quickly than perhaps the 2D and 3D tutorials do. This is going to be, it's going to start off quite simple and then get ever more complex as we introduce things like physics, manipulation of objects, and things like that, which not all first-person games are going to need. So really, I'd say just follow along this tutorial for as long as you need to. With that said, let's begin. We'll have a fresh project, a fresh Unity project open, and we're going to start by importing Adventure Creator in full. Actually, in this one, I'm going to leave out the 2D demo. So I've got my Adventure Creator import package window here. I'm just going to deselect the 2D demo because we're not going to be using any of the assets for that. So Adventure Creator's installation is a lot easier than it was when I was making the previous videos. We don't have to go in and manually add tags or layers or inputs or anything like that. Adventure Creator will do it all for us. Adventure Creator's installation pop-up box appears, and it'll just prompt us that it has detected that some of the layers and inputs that it needs to run aren't present, but it can do this all, it can add these automatically for us. I'll just press OK for that, and we'll see down in the console here that it's gone and created an input named menu and two layers named navmesh and background image, which are necessary for AC to run. We can now test out that everything's installed properly by running the demo game, and we can do this very simply by going to the top toolbar, choosing Adventure Creator, getting started, load 3D demo. It'll then prompt us to open the demo scene, which we'll do. We won't save this empty scene. And as we do so, the main Adventure Creator window will open up for us. So I'm just going to dock it here on the right next to the inspector, so we've got a nice deep layout for it. And I'll run the demo game just to confirm that everything's up and running. So here we have the demo game running, and now we can go and begin making our own first-person game. We begin by creating our own set of managers for our game. This is the step that we do for all games made with AC. Now you can see in our AC game editor window we have 8 of these sub-tabs, and each of these tabs represents a different manager, and each manager has its own asset file. Now right now we have the demos managers loaded in, so you can see with the scene tab loaded we have the demo scene manager asset. In settings we have demo settings manager. So we're going to go and create our own managers for our new first-person game, and we can do that very easily by using the New Game Wizard. So I'll go again up to the top toolbar, choosing Adventure Creator, getting started, and then New Game Wizard. And this will just be a case of filling in the forms as we step through these different pages. So I'll choose Next, and I'm required to enter in a game name. I'll just call this my first-person game. Choose Next. What kind of camera perspective are we going to have? This is going to be in full 3D. And what is our movement going to be? How is our player going to be controlled? we'll change it from point and click to first person. Choose next again. Our interface, how do we want to interact with hotspots? Now this is really a topic in and of itself. We're going to leave it as the most simple, context sensitive. That just basically means a one-click interface. So we can left click on a hotspot to interact with it. We have the other modes that are available to us are listed in the manual, and the 3D demo tutorial goes over choose hotspot then interaction method. So if you're interested in the other ways that AC can be used to interact with objects, have a look at that demo, that video as well. Finally, we have the GUI system. How do we want our menus to be arranged? We're going to use the default AC because it's really just the quickest one to get us up and running. Again, you can refer to the other tutorial videos for other tutorials about making your own interface, although in this tutorial we are going to be creating our own inventory box as well. I'll choose next again, just confirm that everything is as we want, and then I'll click finish. Now we can, none of this is set in stone, we can go and make changes to any of these after this process. This is just a way of getting us up and running quickly. So that's been done, and you can now see that our asset files are now loaded in. So in the settings manager we now have my first person game settings manager loaded into this tab. We've also been set up with our first scene. You see we have all of these new game objects here. These are mostly just folders for us to put things in or for us. But what we're actually going to do is we're going to make use of the set in the 3D demo, that basement scene, as the basis of the first scene in our first person game. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load up the demo scene. It's in Adventure Creator, Demo, Scenes, and then Basement. I'll open this up. And before I do anything else, I'm going to save this as a new scene. So I'm going to save the scene as in my first person game. I'll make a new folder, Scenes, and then I'll call this Basement as well. I'm also going to strip away everything except the graphics in this set. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove everything in this scene, Control A, and then deselect the set geometry and the lights folders, and delete everything else. So all we're left with, all we're left with are the set and the lights. I'm going to remove a little bit more actually. I want to get rid of this barrel because this is a hotspot and we're going to be making our own hotspots in this game. So I'll just remove that, and I'll do the same with this canvas. So now we have a new scene with graphics that we can then go and start manipulating. In a moment we're going to create our player character that we can then use to walk around in first person, but before we do that we need to ready our scene so that we can use it with Adventure Creator. Now we've taken the demo scene, we've removed everything except the lights and the geometry, the graphics. We're going to convert it into an Adventure Creator scene by going to the AC Game Editor and then the Scene tab. And by the way, if you've lost this, if you've closed it by accident, you can open it up again by going to Adventure Creator, Editors, and then Game Editor. But in the Scene Manager, we want to organize our room objects, and this will also set it up to be used by AC. And we can do it with folders or without folders. I'm going to choose with folders, but it doesn't really make much of a difference. The key thing is that we have these folder objects created in our hierarchy, and it's just to aid with scene clutter. But if we didn't want to do that, or if we wanted to organize things on our own way, we could choose without folders instead. Now we're going to have our player appear in the default player start. So in our scene settings you have our default player start field, and that's this small arrow here. But when the player spawns, once we've created him, he's going to fall straight through the floor because all of this geometry has no collision. So the first thing we're going to do is put the floor down to stop him from doing that. Now we could do that just using a standard Unity plane or something like that, but AC also has a list of prefabs down at the bottom of this scene manager, and within navigation we've got collision cube, and if I use that to create a new collision cube, I can put one down for us, and doing it this way just means that we can then use Adventure Creator's collision visibility tools here, so I can turn them on and off. Actually that makes more sense when I've got it deselected, on and off. So with that selected, I'm going to move it down to about -0.5 on the Y position, and then stretch it out so that it covers the floor. Now we'll have to do the walls as well, but I'll do that in a moment. Actually I'll turn visibility off so it's not clipping through. Now we're going to create our own player character, but when we're doing so we also have to work with some of the, we also have to tweak some of the settings. We have to add some more inputs to Unity's input manager. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually test or set up our game using the demo game's player character, because he's already been set up to use first person, and then when we've got everything set up using him, we'll then create our own player character. Now we can find the demo game's player character in Assets, Adventure Creator, Demo, and then Resources. He's called Tin Pot, so I'll just drag him into the hierarchy there, and you can see him here in the middle of the scene. Now normally Adventure Creator likes you to have your player character as a prefab instantiated at runtime, and that happens by assigning it as your player here in the settings manager, and then you remove the actual local instance of the player from the scene. But just to test with, we can have the player in the scene, in the actual scene file itself, and Adventure Creator will pick up on any player that is present in the scene when it runs. So if I run the game now, even though we have no player assigned in our character settings, we're using the Tin Pot player character. Now you can see here I can use the cursor keys or the horizontal and vertical axes to move my player around. There's a few things wrong with it. First of all, we've got we can see the geometry of this character clipping through here. You also see that we can't look around. When we use the mouse, we're just moving the cursor around screen. So we want to change that. Now there's two modes if you think of the mouse when it comes to first person. You have this mode where you're using the cursor and you're having a fixed rotation of your camera, and then you have the locked cursor mode, which means that the cursor is directly in the middle, and moving the mouse results in a change in camera rotation. So we can change which mode is happening in game by going to Edit. Oh, well, actually, let me explain a little bit better. We want to invoke the toggle cursor input, and you can see down here in the available inputs, we've got among them toggle cursor, and that's a button, and that'll flip between the two modes. So let's go into our Edit menu, Project Settings, Input, and I'll make a new axis and call this toggle cursor, and we'll map it to, let's say, left alt. Now if we run now and I press left alt, you can see the cursor is now in the middle of the screen, but we can't move, we can't actually use the mouse to free look. So let's change that now. What we're missing, if we go back to this available inputs list, is a cursor horizontal and a cursor vertical axis. And again, that's done within the input manager. Now these axes are basically just renames of Unity's mouse X and mouse Y inputs. And they're called cursor horizontal and vertical because using these same axes we can map them to either the mouse or, say, a keyboard or a controller, so that we can manipulate the cursor or the free look using a gamepad. So I'm going to rename my mouse X to cursor horizontal, and I'll rename my mouse Y to cursor vertical. And now when I run the game and I press Alt, I can now turn the camera like so. Now if we wanted the game to begin like this, or always be like this, we can go up into the Settings Manager, and in Interface Settings we have an option named Lock Cursor in Screen Center when game begins. I'm going to check that, and now we begin free aiming. And if we didn't want the player to be able to move the cursor around like this, we could just disable or remove the toggle cursor input that we just made. Let's go and make our own player. So let's remove Tin Pot from the scene, and we'll use the Character Wizard to create our new player for us. We can do this from Adventure Creator, up at the top toolbar, Editors, Character Wizard, and just like the New Game Wizard, this form, just filling these forms will do it all for us. So I'll choose Next. Is this going to be a player or an NPC? Now on this page we normally supply our base graphic, whether it being like a model or a sprite or something like that. But because we're making a first-person player, we're not going to make use of any graphics. We're not going to look down and look at our feet, for example. So all we have to do is just say, yes, this is a player, and choose Next. And that's it. If we wanted to add graphics later, we could do that. Our animation engine is technically set to Mecanum, you can see here in the Player's Inspector, but it's not actually going to make use of anything because we don't have any models. Now you can see here we have our capsule collider and a first-person camera as a child of that. And if we run that, you'll see we're actually a little bit short and we move quite slowly but with quite a bit of head movement. So what I'm going to do is change a few of these things. I'm going to start by making the capsule collider a little bit more tall. So we have our capsule collider. I'm going to change the height to 3 and the center as 0, 1.5, 0. We'll now need to raise the camera up so that it's near the top of this collider. So I'll click on this first person camera and raise it up like so. It's about 2.5, looks good. And now we found that the character moves quite slowly when we walk forward. So it's always good to test this sort of thing in game. So while we're playing, I'm going to change the walk speed scale to 3. And let's see how that works. That's quite good. And there's still a bit too much head bobbing for my tastes, so what I'm going to do is select the first person camera, and we've got bob head when moving. We could disable this completely, but I'm just going to reduce the amount to about 0.05, so it's quite a lot more reduced now. We do have additional options for head bobbing. We could use an animation or a script or something like that, but this is the built-in sort of default head bob animation. Now, instead of having our player prefab, a player character in the scene file, we're going to make this a prefab and instantiate it later. So I'll just drag this into our My First Person Game folder, and when I exit gameplay, this keeps all of the changes that we made during the scene. So this is our player. I'll rename this to, say, My First Person Player. And I'll remove this from the scene. And now we just need to tell Adventure Creator that this is our default player. This is the one to load in when our game begins. So we can do that from the game editor. In the settings manager, we have character settings, and we have this player prefab field. So I'll drag our My First Person Player. I don't know why it has a different name here, but this is My First Person Player, and is now assigned as our default. So when we run the scene, and this will be true for any Adventure Creator scene, it will spawn My First Person Player ready for us to walk around in. Now if I press, now we want to make it so that we can run and jump Jump is already in here. It's already a Unity input axis. You can see again in our available inputs we have a jump button, and Unity already has one mapped to space by default. We want to be able to run as well, so I'm going to say take fire 1 and just rename this to run, and maybe this say left shift, remove the alternative. We could do run as an axis, or we could do toggle run if we wanted to have one button to enable running and another button to turn it off. But now I can hold down left shift and I can run around. Now that we have our first person character created, it's time to work a little bit on our navigation, or rather our scene collisions specifically. Collision is necessary when we work in either first person or direct control. That meaning when we are moving the character, we're not relying on pathfinding on nav meshes, we're actually relying on just literally physically moving the character in 3D space. So we need to put up collisions for any walls or anything like that that our player can walk through. Now we could do this if you have in your 3D application of choice, you can create a separate bounding box for that, or you can actually use the Unity's mesh collider to generate one from your actual set geometry mesh. But I'm going to do this just using Adventure Creator's Scene Manager, again using collision cubes, and I'm going to do it quite roughly. I'm going to be quite quick about it. Just going to create walls for our collisions, duplicate that, turn it and put it into the wall. This might be a little bit tedious to watch, so I'm going to be quite quick about it. Another one for the stairs. And of course, if you're following along, you can take much more time and care over this. I'm really just doing it to demonstrate the principles and workflow involved rather than being really, really careful about it. So what I'm really doing is just kind of marking up any area that we don't want the player to be able to walk through. And like I said, we could rely on our own like specially made geometry or mesh gliders or things like that. It's just that within AC we can use these collision cubes just to make things a little bit more convenient when we're just working within Adventure Creator's Scene Manager. So now if I run the game, we hopefully cannot walk through some of these walls, although we might clip through, say, this shelf because I haven't put a collision there. But if I wanted to take the time, I could really fine-tune that and make sure that you can't go through anything. Now, we could make use of nav mesh. You see, in our scene settings, we have our default nav mesh, we have our pathfinding method. We're not going to make use of any of that for this particular tutorial. When making a first-person game, you're only really going to want to use pathfinding if you want to move the player, say, during cutscenes, or if you wanted NPCs to walk around, making use of pathfinding. But if you're not going to do that, then you don't really need to worry about it. You can refer to the other tutorials, say the 3D tutorial and the 2.5D tutorial, if you want to know more about pathfinding in 3D. So I'm going to leave that for now and just rely on these collision cubes for our navigation. Let's start working on some features that are more specific to adventure games. So what we're going to do is we're going to make or have something in our scene that we can go and pick up, something we can interact with in some way. It's not going to be, it's literally going to be just click on something and then it's added to our inventory, whereas later on we're going to have more sort of physical interactions and things like that. But we're just going to keep things very simple for now. We're going to make use of more of the graphics that are in this demo game. we've got this sword in the corner, and we're going to make it so that we can click on this and it's then added to our inventory, just like in the 3D demo. Now if I click on this sword, you'll see that it's got this, this icon next to it in the hierarchy. And if I go to the inspector, that is because it has a remember transform script as well as a highlight script, and both of these were used to build the 3D demo. And I will remove these just so that we can do all this from scratch. So this is literally just a model of a sword, and we're going to make it interactive. So the first thing we're going to do is create a hotspot around it so that we can click on it, we can interact with it. I'm going to select it once more, and in our scene manager I'm going to go to hotspot, and I'm going to create a hotspot for this sword. But just before I do, because I have this sword selected, we've got position over selected mesh appearing in this this scene manager. So I'm going to check that and press add new, and then you can see that it's created a hotspot that's this yellow bounding box around the boundary of the sword. Now it's a little bit too big. I think what I'll do is probably rotate it and shrink it down a little bit, like so. Again, you can spend more time sort of fine-tuning it if you prefer. You could also attach a hotspot script directly to the sword, but I prefer to just work in this this way, using the scene manager to add my prefabs. Everything gets put into the right scene folder and all that rest of it. So with my hotspot selected, I'm going to go to its inspector, and this is going to be my hotspot for my sword. So I'm going to rename this rather inventively sword hotspot. Now working my way down through the list of fields we've got interaction source. So we're going to create a series of actions that dictate what happens when we click on this sword. We're going to leave it all in the scene, that's fine. Our label, we don't want sword hotspot to appear when we hover over it. We would just want sword, so I'm going to type that in, so that field there. Now this is optional, but I'll show, we'll make it so that when we hover over the sword with the mouse, the sword sort of glows a bit. It makes it a bit more obvious that that's what we're selecting. And we do that by assigning a highlight component here. And the highlight goes on the model that we want to highlight. So that was in set geometry, sword, and I'm going to add the component highlight. And if I just cancel all of the add component field, I can find that from Adventure Creator, hotspots, and then highlight. And we can tweak all of this. We can even use our own highlight method of highlighting if we wanted to insert a custom script. But I'm just going to use the default brighten the material. So back to our sword hotspot, I'm going to assign our sword as the object to highlight. And the rest we can leave. We then want to create a use interaction, and this will be what happens when we click on it. So I'll click on the little plus to create a new use interaction. Now we're using the default Adventure Creator interface, which means we have 3 cursors by default. We've got use, talk to, and look at. These are all created within the cursor manager. So back to the AC Game Editor, we've got cursor, and this is where we can define all the various interaction icons that we can have in our game. If you wanted to change that, this is where you would do it. But I think we'll leave it like this for now. So this will be a new use interaction, and I'll click to the right of our interaction field. We don't have an interaction defined. I'll click create to automatically create one. And that's this sword use interaction here. And if I select it, we can either edit it in the inspector, but I prefer to use the action list editor. So you can see this little node icon to the right of it in the hierarchy. If I click on that, it'll bring up the action list editor window, and this is like a visual scripting interface to define what happens when we click on it. So what we're going to have happen is very simple. It's just going to do 3 things. It's going to disable the hotspot so that we can't click on it again. It's going to hide the sword from view, and it's going to add the sword to our inventory. So we can do the first couple straight off. What we can do is add a new action, or I'm going to change the first action that's here. We're going to make it a hotspot enable or disable, and that'll allow us to turn off that hotspot. So the hotspot to effect is going to be this sword hotspot. The change to make is that we're going to disable it, and then we're going to make a new action to hide the sword from view. So I'll drag a new arrow out like so, and this is going to be an object object visibility. And the object to effect is going to be our sword. That's in the set geometry folder. And we're going to change the visibility to invisible. And we can test that now, actually, just what we've done so far by running the game. We can walk over to the sword, and if we hover over it, you see it gets a little bit brighter. Sword comes up, and I can click on it. Those are then deactivated. So now let's make a like an actual inventory item for us to place in our inventory. And we can do all that within our inventory manager. Again, it's in the AC game editor. I'll click on the inventory tab, and then underneath inventory items, I'll click create new item. And this new inventory item I'm going to name sword, and I'm going to give it a main graphic. Let's see, if we go into Adventure Creator, Demo, where is it going to be? Inv text. We then have sword, and I'll make sword active, the active graphic as well. That just it's like a different graphic that we can use when we select it. So now this is something that we can then have appear in our inventory. So back to our sword use action list. I'm going to create 1/3 action. This time is going to be an inventory add or remove. And you can see it's already set up the way we need it to be. It's going to add the item sword, and sword is the only option in this list because we only have one item. So if we now walk over to it, we click on it, it's then added to our inventory, which we can find. If I press toggle cursor to come out of this free look mode, you can then see it added in the inventory. Now the inventory by default is activated by hovering the mouse towards the top of the screen, so we're going to change that in the next section. So what we now have is a simple hotspot with an interaction, so we can test out our interface with. Now we have, as I was describing earlier, we have these two modes of cursors. We have our sword inventory listed here, and we have to press the toggle cursor button to toggle between the two cursor modes so that we can actually access our inventory. What we're going to do now is make it so that the switching between these two cursor modes is all automatic. So we don't have to think about actually pressing the toggle cursor input. That's all kind of handled for us based on what menu is open. So we're going to change it so that instead of going to the top here, we can open the inventory by pressing the tab key. And when that happens, we'll have the inventory appear in the center of the screen, and we come out of free look mode automatically, and we can then use the cursor to select our inventory. First, I'm going to actually disable the, actually if I just open it up again, I'm going to disable this menu down here because we're going to, well, it's just getting in the way for me. I prefer to actually get rid of it. It's really just a demonstration of how you can open up the main menu other than pressing the escape key. I'm going to select in our menu manager, we have our list of menus. That one down here is the in-game menu, and I'm just going to check start game locked off. So I'm not deleting it, I'm just preventing it from opening. Now our inventory menu, which I can select by clicking here, is arranged up along the top, and it is set to with an appear type of mouse over, which means it's open when I move the cursor up. But we're going to make it so that we can't actually move the cursor when we're walking around in first person. So we're going to have to rely on pressing another key on the keyboard for it. So we're going to change the appear type from mouse over to on input key. And we then need to enter in a name of the toggle key. And this is going to be the name that's listed in the input manager. So I'm going to enter in, say, toggle inventory. And I'm going to have to then create that in our input manager by going to Edit Project Settings Input. And I'll make another input by increasing the size by 1. And I'll name this toggle inventory. And I'll map it to tab. So we can test that out by pressing tab. You can see that turns on and off. Now let's restyle it a little bit. Let's make it so that it appears, instead of a long horizontal line, we make it more of a grid. So I'm going to change the, use the sliders to change the size. And the size, I'm changing the actual size of the menu itself, not the elements within it here. So I'm going to increase the height, reduce the width a little bit, like so. And I'll change the position from aligned to centered. So it's now centered in the middle here. I'll probably reduce it quite a bit, actually. And I'll make it probably a 4x3 inventory. So we'll have items going down like a grid here. We can do that by going down to the list of elements. We have our inventory elements. Let's get the inventory box element, and we're going to change the slot orientation from horizontal to grid, and we'll change the grid size to 4, just bring it up 1, and then we'll reduce the maximum number of slots to 12, so that you can see here we have 4x3. Now I think what I'll actually do is just get the Shift right button. I will tweak the position of that. Now you could, again, just with like adding collisions to the wall, you could actually spend quite a lot of time sort of giving all this all polish. But I'm going to be quite brief over it. Now this is of course using Adventure Creator's built-in menu display system. If you prefer, you can of course use Unity UI for this. You can link up Unity UI prefabs to Adventure Creator's menu system. There are tutorials online for this. This is covered as part of the 2.5D tutorial, and it has a text tutorial on the tutorials website as well. But now we have our inventory menu as a grid in the middle of our screen. And the last thing we need to do is, if I demonstrate, we can bring up our inventory with the toggle key, but when it's open, we still can't move the cursor around. When we move the mouse, we're still free looking. Now there's two ways we can get around that, and I'll show you the simplest one first, and then we'll make something a little bit more complex. The first one is simply to make the game paused when it's open by checking pause game when enabled. And what that means is the game itself is going to freeze when this is enabled. And Adventure Creator knows that if the game is paused, you're not going to be able to free look, so it automatically unlocks the cursor for you. And then when we toggle again, press tab, we then go back into free aim mode. Now it might be that you don't want the game to actually freeze when this happens. It might be, for example, you have a lot of moving objects in your scene and you have a real sort of sense of animation, dynamicism going on in your scene. You don't want everything to freeze when you toggle the inventory. Now that's down to you. The way to enable enable cursor movement when this inventory is open and the game is not paused, well, first of all, we uncheck pause game when enabled. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use actions to disable free aiming whenever this menu is open. So in our inventory menu's properties, you see we have two fields for action lists when this is turned on and when it's turned off. So I'm going to create both of these automatically, and they're both put here in our assets folder. I'm going to move them into a new subfolder. I'll create a folder, action lists, and I'll move both of them into that. So we're just going to use these action lists to enable and disable free aiming. We'll start with when we turn on, and both of these are going to use the same single action. This is going to be an engine manage systems action. Sorry, it's not going to be an engine manage systems, it's going to be a player constrain action. And here we have free aiming, and we're going to disable free aiming. And we're going to re-enable it when we turn the inventory menu off. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it in there, making the change that we need to. So I've got copy up here. I can open up the inventory when turn off action list by double click on it. I'll paste in that copy, delete the one that's already there, and I will change free aiming to enabled, so it's automatically re-enabled. So now I'm walking around, I'll press tab, the game is not paused, and because it's not paused I can still use my cursor keys to walk around. Personally, I prefer to keep player movement restricted when the inventory is open, so I'm going to go back to that same player constrain action that runs when we turn the inventory menu on, and you can see we also have fields for disabling movement in all four keyboard directions. So I'm going to disable up, down, left, right movement, and then when we turn the inventory off, I'm going to re-enable them. And so we can move around. When we open the inventory, we can't move around, but our game is still running in the background. Any animations that are playing are still going to carry on. Now, when we go over and pick up our inventory item and open it up in the menu, you can see it appears here, and then when we click on it, it becomes the active cursor. And so when we close that menu, the cursor, which is now locked in the middle of the screen, shows the inventory item in the middle. And well, that might not be suitable for all games. That probably doesn't look very good, particularly if you have big inventory item graphics. So what we're going to do is move it away from the cursor and have our selected item shown down here in a separate box. So the first thing we'll do is prevent that cursor from taking the inventory, the selected inventory item graphic. And we can change that in the cursor manager. And in here we have settings for all of our different cursor modes. And underneath inventory cursor, we're going to change when inventory selected to change hotspot label instead of change cursor. And that means the cursor graphic is still going to be the same. And now we can move our selected inventory graphic to a separate menu, or rather a separate inventory box element in a new menu. So in the menu manager, I'm going to click on create new menu, and I'll name it selected inventory. And I'm going to set its appear type, which is the rule for when it shows up, from manual to while inventory selected. So as you might imagine, this is going to appear only when we have a selected inventory item. I'm going to position it aligned and then set the alignment to lower right. So you can see this little square here is in the lower right corner of the screen. And the size is automatic, so this is going to fit automatically any element that is inside it. So we don't have to change the size. What we're going to be doing is changing the size of the element inside it. And the element inside it is going to be of type inventory box. I'll click add new. And the inventory box type is going to be changed from default to display selected. And that means we're not going to be able to click on any item that shows up on it. We're not going to be able to interact with it in any way. It's just going to show the selected inventory item. I'll change the size to manual so that I can now reduce it in size to suit. And maybe I'll give it a background. If I give the background texture of the menu, let's see, call it grey, which is in keeping with the current inventory menu. Let's now test this out. I can click on my sword, select it, and you can see it appears down here. And it's no longer taking over the cursor graphic. But our hotspot label, which is the text right above the cursor, let's make it so that it appears down here at the bottom instead of just following the cursor. Now that's done within the hotspot menu, which I can select again in the menu manager, and I'll change the position from follow cursor to manual, and then increase the Y slider so that it's down at the bottom. And you can see it now appearing down at the bottom like so. Now let's make it a little bit more obvious in this inventory menu that our sword is selected. So what we're going to do, if you recall, when we made our sword inventory item, we assigned two graphics. We assigned our main graphic and an active graphic. So let's make it so that our active graphic is used whenever an inventory item is selected, in this case the sword. We can do that in the settings manager, underneath inventory settings, and we have selected items display. We're going to change to show hover graphic. And that now means that whenever this is selected, it's going to use that sword active texture, just to really make it clear that that's selected. But now that we're showing our selected item here, we only want to show it while the inventory menu is closed. So when we open the inventory menu again, we want this to close automatically. Now, this selected inventory menu's appear type is set to while inventory selected, and we don't want to change that. So in order to close the menu, what we're going to do is we're going to lock it. And locking will prevent a menu from turning on when its normal rules apply. And we're going to lock this menu when our inventory menu, that's the standard inventory menu, is turned on. And if you remember, we created action lists when this inventory menu is turned on and off, so we'll just add new actions to both of these. So let's start with what happens when this menu turns on. We're going to make it so that when the inventory menu is turned on, the selected inventory menu is locked off. So as well as constraining our player movement, we're going to add another action, this time going to be a menu change state action. The change type is going to be lock menu, and the menu to lock is going to be selected inventory. And in the same way, when we turn off the inventory menu, we're going to unlock the selected inventory menu. So we'll use another change state, unlock menu, to unlock selected inventory. Now let's test our progress, and we can walk over, pick up the sword, open up the inventory menu, select it, and then when we close the inventory menu, you can see the selected sword graphic showing up on the bottom right. Let's now make it easy to deselect this inventory item. At the moment, the only way we can do that is to go back into the inventory menu and click again on the item. So we're going to make a new input button that we can press, and when we press that, it will deselect our inventory. So first, let's make the input. I'm going to go to Edit, Project Settings, Input, and I'll make a new axis and name it Deselect Inventory. And I'll map it to, say, well, the X button, I suppose. I was going to map it to space, but that's already taken up by jump. Now what we want to do is we want to tell Adventure Creator that when we press the button that is mapped to Deselect Inventory, we're going to run a new action list that is going to deselect it for us. And we can do that by using active inputs. Now, active inputs can be set within the active inputs window. We can get there by going to Adventure Creator, up at the top toolbar, Editors, and then Active Inputs Editor. And this will list any active input that we have in our game. We don't have any at the moment, so I'm just going to add one. And you can see it listed here. The input button that is going to respond to this is going to be deselect inventory, which is the same access name that I've just created in the input manager. And it's going to be available whenever the game is normal. That is, in normal gameplay, we're not paused or in a cutscene or anything. And when this input button is triggered, or is pressed, we're going to trigger a new action list that I can create now. And it's created a new action list for me. I'll name this Deselect Inventory. And I'll place it in my action list subfolder. And if I open that up, I'm going to make it an inventory select action, and the select type is going to be deselect active. And finally, I'm going to make sure that this runs in the background so that it doesn't conflict, so that it doesn't create a cutscene out of it. I'll go to Show Properties and change its When Running field from Pause Gameplay to Run in Background. So now let's test it out. We can click on our sword, press Tab to open up our inventory, select the sword, tab out, and I can press X to deselect it. Now let's go one final step further and make it so that pressing X while the inventory menu is open does nothing. We only want it to work while we're in normal gameplay without the inventory menu open. So back in our deselect inventory action, I'm going to add a new action, and it's going to be a menu check state. And what we're going to do is we're going to check whether or not the inventory menu is open. So menu to check is going to be inventory, with the state to check as being the default. Menu is visible. I'll make this the first action. So I'm going to detach this wire for the moment. So let's just read what this action is doing. It's going to check if the inventory menu is visible. If the condition is met, we want it to stop. But if the condition is not met, that is, if inventory is not visible, we want to deselect the inventory. So one last time, we can go over, click on the sword, open up the inventory, select it, and pressing X does nothing. But if I tab out to come away from the inventory menu, I can then press X to deselect it. We're now going to introduce the physics demo into this project because we're going to make another scene using that demo's assets. Before we do so, we're just going to make sure that this scene is added to the build settings, which I can do from File, Build Settings, and then Add Open Scenes. So I've added my basement scene. And the physics demo can be found from the Adventure Creator website, adventurecreator.org/downloads. Also available from Adventure Creator itself by going to Adventure Creator Online Resources Downloads. And on this downloads page, you've got the physics demo's source files. So I've got it here ready to import into my project. And we can find the scene that is used for the physics demo inside Physics Demo Scenes Office. And again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to File, Save Scene As, make a new scene inside my new scenes folder, name it Office, and remove everything in here except for set geometry and lights. I think I'll move this chair out the way as well. Now, this scene is scaled a little bit too large in comparison with basement scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select set geometry and reduce the scale to 0.5 in all 3 directions. Might get this light and have it shine downwards as well in the middle of the room, like so. Actually, that was the wrong one. I'll get this spotlight and have it shining down so that our room is a little bit brighter. So I'm going to turn this into an Adventure Creator scene as well. I'll do things a little bit differently to last time for some variety. So in my game editor, I'll go to the Scene Manager and I'll click Organize Room Objects without folders. And as you can see, our player start is here. I'll probably move this out more into the middle of the room, like so. And this time, rather than using collision cubes for my colliders, I'm going to be using the meshes themselves. So I'm going to select Office here, and in the inspector, I'm going to add a mesh collider component, and I'll select the desk as well, the table, and do the same thing. I think I'll probably make this convex as well. Next, I'll go to File, Build Settings again, and add this open scene to our list of scenes in the build. Save it. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another player start. Basically, we already have one player start in our scene, and that's the default player start. That's what will be used when we begin our game from this scene. So what we're going to do is we're going to make another player start that is referred to whenever we enter from the basement scene. Now again, at the bottom of the Scene Manager, we have our list of scene prefabs, and I'm going to go to Navigation, Player Start, and I'll make a new player start named Player Start _ Office. And I'll move this one over to the side of the room, like so. You can imagine imagine there was another door here that we might come in from. I turn it around like so. This is where we're going to appear when we come from the basement. But we need to configure our player start component for that. So I'm going to go to Inspector, find our player start script, and where it says previous scene that activates, choose scene by, we can either choose by name or number, and number is the build index. I'll do it by name just so it's really clear, and I'll choose the previous scene as basement. Save the scene, and now we'll go back to our basement scene, and I'm going to add a hotspot to this door over here, and I'm going to make this interactive, and when we use it, we're going to go to the other scene. So I'll select the door mesh, and then in the AC game editor, I'll go to hotspot, position over selected mesh. I'll name this hotspot door, add new, and then I'll name this label as door. The object to highlight is going to be our door mesh, so I'll select the actual door mesh in the hierarchy. It's under set geometry and then basement. Oh, it's already got a highlight script from the 3D demo. So I've got my hotspot door, and I'm going to set the object to highlight as door. I'll create a new use interaction, and the interaction itself, the action list, I'll create automatically door use, and I can open up the actions for that by clicking the node icon. And this is going to be, well, before we transition, what I'm going to have happen is we'll have the camera fade out a little bit, and then we'll change scene, and then in the new scene we'll fade the camera back in, just so it's a really smooth transition. So we'll start with a camera fade action. The type is going to be fade out. We'll fade out over half a second. We'll wait until finish, so that it doesn't do the next action until this is complete. And then we'll make a scene switch action. And again, we can choose our scene either by number or name. I'll choose name and then type in office. Finally, let's do the fade in on the other side. So I've opened up our office scene, and up at the top of the scene manager, we have a list of scene cutscenes, and our on-start cutscene is going to run when we transition from any other scene. So I'll choose create, make a new on-start cutscene, and this is going to be a camera fade, a fade-in type of half a second that'll again wait until finish. So if I save that and go back to the basement, you'll see we can walk over to the door here, use it, and then we're in the other scene. Now, just in testing that, I found that actually one thing we need to do is, you can see actually if I back up quite a way, we're still able to select the hotspot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the length or the distance that we can interact with hotspots over. And that's done within the settings manager. At the bottom we have raycast settings, and what we want to control is the hotspot ray length, which is currently set to 100, which is quite high. I think let's see what happens with about 4. So it's not highlighted, I get close enough and then it highlights. Actually 4 seems a bit too high, let's try 2.5. And 2.5 seems about right. I have to get up quite close to be able to select it. Now that we have our office scene from the physics demo, let's go and make a few objects that we can interact with. And we're going to make them progressively more dynamic. So we're going to start with a desk drawer here underneath this table. We're going to find the model for it inside Physics Demo, Models, Table, and then Draw. We can just drag this directly into the scene window. Now you can see it's a little bit too big, so I'm going to go to the inspector and change the scale to 0.75, 0.5, and then 0.5 again. And that'll just mean I can slot it in a little bit better, like so. And we've got some space for some more drawers we can add in afterwards. Now, we're going to keep this relatively simple. What we're going to have happen is we can click on it once and the drawer will open out automatically. And if we click on it again, it'll shut itself automatically. So we're going to start by making it a hotspot, and I could select the mesh and then create a new hotspot, but that's going to be on a different item and we want the two to move together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the hotspot script directly to this mesh object. I'm going to go to Add Component, type in hotspot, and add it manually. The hotspot also needs a collider, and a mesh collider, and a box collider is perfect for this case. So I'm going to add the component box collider. And I don't want this to be colliding with the player, so I'm just going to check is trigger. Now, because our object's name is draw, I don't need a new label. I will give it a highlight component so that we can then have it highlight itself when we hover over it. So our object to highlight is going to be draw. Now let's make our interaction. We're going to make one new use interaction by clicking the plus icon, and I'll create the interaction action list, draw use. And I'll rename this a little bit. I'm going to take our top draw and I'm going to take our draw and name it top draw. And actually I think I will give it a new label. I'll call it draw, like so. And then I'll make this action list top draw use. So in this action list, top draw use, I'm going to use the object transform action, and we can use that to rotate, move, and scale objects from one to another. And you can see the first field in this action is movable object, and it requires a movable component. So we need to add this component to the draw. So I'll get top draw, and I'll add one more component, and this is going to be movable. and it doesn't have any parameter values or inspector, anything like that. It's just something you have to add on. And now in our action list editor, I can click on the little circle to the right of the field, and I can select top drawer. Now when we want to open it, we want to open it in the direction of this blue arrow. That's the positive Z direction. And we want it to move out about this far, which is half a unit in the positive Z axis. So we're going to translate by, instead of 2, this means a relative amount, the vector 0, 0, 0.5. So 0.5 in the Z direction. We're going to do it over about half a second, so 0.5 again, and we'll wait until finish. Now at the moment the move method is set to linear, which means it'll be a very linear motion. We can change this to something a bit nicer. We can actually go to custom curve and then click on this time curve, and we can define the actual velocity over time. And by default it's a nice S curve, so that'll be some smooth motion. Let's test that out. And we can click on it like so. Now there are a couple of things wrong with it already. First of all, you can see that even if we're hovering the mouse cursor over the top of the desk, we're not actually over the drawer, we still have the object being highlighted. The second is that we can click on it multiple times and it's still opening out further and further. So we have at the moment no way of telling it that it's open, and if it's open, to close it. Let's fix the cursor issue first. This is down to the fact that we have no collider in between the camera and the hotspot. So what we need to do is we need to create a new collider that's going to prevent those clicks. We can do this in the AC game editor and go to collision cube. I'm going to make a new collision cube, and I'm going to call this desktop hotspot blocker, which is a bit of a mouthful, but anyway, I'll position it so that it's covering the top of the desk. Reduce the scale in the y-axis, increase in the x and z. That looks about right to me. Now we need to go into the inspector, and first of all we're going to make this a trigger so that it doesn't interfere with our player or anything like that. It doesn't interfere with our player's motion rather. And I'm going to put it on change it from the ignore raycast layer to the default layer. And the default layer is what Adventure Creator uses for hotspots. We could change that. We could put hotspots on a separate layer if we wanted. That's all done within the settings manager. If you go down to the bottom, you can see underneath raycast settings, we can also define what is our hotspot layer. But as long as we have another object that isn't our hotspot on that same layer, that's going to block clicks and mouse overs to that hotspot. So now when we look down on the desktop, we can't select it. We can only do it by going out a little bit out and then viewing the desk drawer itself. Now let's make it so that we can open and close the drawer. We first have to create a variable to keep track of its state. We have two types of variables. We can see them both listed in our variables manager. We have global, which exist in all scenes, and we have local, which only exist in the scene in which you make them. And generally, you only want to make local variables whenever you can, because otherwise you're going to get a lot of clutter in your globals list. You really just want to keep things in local whenever necessary. So we'll create a new local variable, and we're going to name it top drawer is open. The type is going to be Boolean, and its initial value is going to be false because it's going to be shut when the game begins. So going back to our top drawer use action list, we're going to amend this now. We're going to first have the action list read the value of this variable, and it's going to act accordingly. So we're going to create a new action, and this is going to be a variable check action. And before I do anything else, I'm going to make this the first action. So I'll move this to front. Move this out the way. So the source of this is going to be local. We're going to be reading the value of our local variable, and we only have one variable, so that's already selected. We're going to be comparing the value with what's here, and the value here is true. So this action is going to work out if top drawer is open is currently set to true or not. Now if it is true, that means it's open, and so we're going to want to close it. If this condition is not met, that means it's shut, so we're going to open it. So we're going to run the existing object transform action. But if it is met, we're going to shut it again, so we're going to create another object transform action that's similar to the one we just made, except it's going to go in the reverse direction. So we're going to use the movable object as top drawer. We're going to translate by minus 0.5 over half a second, and we're going to wait until finish with a custom curve. But after both of these object transforms have been completed, we then need to update the value of this local variable. And we can do that with the variable set action. The source again is going to be local. We're going to be setting the value of top drawer is open. Now this chain of actions on the left is going to happen if that variable is false. So when this action has been completed, we want the drawer to be open. We're going to set the new value of that variable to true. And on this chain of actions, we're going to set it to false. So I'll create a new variable set action, setting the local variable top drawer is open to false, because we're here in this object transform, we're closing the drawer. So now when we run the game, I can see this drawer. I can click on it, and you can see here on the right in our local variables manager, top drawer is open has now been set to true. And if I click on it again, it's set to false, and I'm able to close it again. We're now going to go and make some other drawers for this desk here. We've got top drawer. I'm going to duplicate it twice. I'm going to make middle drawer, move it down to the middle, and then bottom drawer, and move it down to the bottom. And we're going to make it so that both of these drawers can be opened and closed as well. Now we could, to build these action lists, we could duplicate the one we've already got and then change which drawer is opening and closing. But it's a bit tedious to do that, and imagine if we had hundreds of drawers in our game, and it's not really going to be too viable to do that, especially if later on, let's imagine that we wanted the transition time to change for opening. We didn't want it to be half a second, we wanted it to be 1 second. We don't want to have to go through hundreds of action lists and then make all of those changes individually. What we're going to do is have a generic action list that we can then run for any drawer, and it'll read which variable we tell it to and affect the drawer that we tell it to. So I'm going to turn this top drawer use into a generic name, toggle drawer. And I'm going to check inside its properties panel, use parameters. Now this properties panel is also available in the action list editor window. I just go to show properties. So use parameters. Now the parameters box has appeared, and currently we have no parameters. And what we're going to do is we're going to parameterize the fields in our actions. So we're going to make it so that this movable object field in our transform actions are parameterized, and that means we'll be able to set them dynamically when this action list is run. So let's make a new parameter, and it's going to be of type GameObject because we're going to be affecting an object in our scene, and we'll name it draw to move. So if I go back to the actions, you can see our object transform actions now have a new field, movable object, set to no parameter. And this little right arrow here means that this is a parameter field. And because it's set to no parameter, our original movable object, top draw, is still there for us to use. But let's parameterize this field, so I'll change no parameter to draw to move in both of these object transform actions. And that means when we run this action list, it will use the same object that we've assigned at that time to draw to move. This will, I suppose, make more sense as we actually see it in action. But if you are familiar with programming conventions, this is basically like a function parameter. We want to do the same thing to our variable check and variable set actions. We're going to be changing which variable is read and written to dynamically when the action list is run. So again, in our show properties, I'm going to make a new parameter. This one is going to be a local variable, and this is going to be named variable to affect. If I go back to my list of actions, I can change the variable field for my variable check action. I'm going to set it to variable to affect, and I'll do the same thing for my two variable set actions. So these fields are now being set dynamically. So let's go and make new interactions for each of our draws. If I go to top draw, I'm still linked my interaction to toggle draw, so I'm going to deactivate that, unset that, and create a new draw use interaction. And this action list is going to be an action list run action. And we're going to be running our new toggle draw action list. So I'm going to drag toggle draw into my action list field, and I'm going to be able to set the value of those parameters as I run this action list. So I'm going to have my draw to move as top draw, and my variable to affect as top draw is open. Now before I go any further, I'm going to have to create local variables for my two other draws. So I'll go to AC Game Editor, local, and create a new variable. This one is middle draw is open. Actually, I'll name this something else. I'll name this draw slash middle is open, and you'll see why in a moment. I'll go back to my first one and name this draw slash top is open, and a final one called draw slash bottom is open. Now they're all Boolean variables and they're all set to false initially. But you can see now here in my action list run action, I've got my variable to affect, and draw is now like a parent in this pop-up hierarchy. And that's because it's using the / as a way of separating my terms. So it's just a nice way of keeping track if you have a lot of variables in your scene, for example. So I'll do this to my middle draw now. I'll then set the original interaction, and in this one I'm going to be again using an action list run to run the toggle draw action list. The draw to move this time is going to be middle draw, and we're going to be affecting the middle is open draw variable. One final time for the bottom draw, we'll disable the default interaction that was there. I'll create a new one. Once more, it's going to be an action list run to run toggle draw, to affect bottom drawer as the drawer to move, and the variable to affect will be drawer bottom is open. And if we run that now, we see we have all three drawers, and we can open and shut them all individually. Now let's go and make something that has more of a physicality to it. We're going to make a pickup object. We're going to make something that we can pick up from the table. And when I say pick up, I don't mean in the sense of placing something in our inventory. I mean that we're going to have something that we can physically pick up with the mouse cursor, move it around, throw it, turn it around, that sort of thing. And if you've played the physics demo, you'll know what we're going to be using. We're going to be using the rock that is on the table in the physics demo. And we can find this rock in physics demo, models, rock, and we can just place it into the scene like so. It is a little bit too big, so I'll scale it down, something more manageable, and I'll give it the rock material. Now, in order to make a pickup object, we have to use the pickup prefab. In AC's Scene Manager, it's listed underneath movable. So I've got my pickup here. I'm going to add a new one, and it's placed at the origin to begin with. So this prefab needs to be the parent of any mesh that we make use of. So I've got my rock, and I'm going to make it a child of my pickup. So my rock is actually now in the wrong place. I need to clear the position, going into its transform component and rotation. And then I will reposition the actual pickup itself. So I'll put it here on the desk. Maybe I'll rotate it to about that. Now you can see that the pickup prefab has a sphere collider on it. That isn't suitable for our needs in this case. The pickup needs a collider. It's got a rigid body. It's using Unity's physics system, so it needs a collider. It doesn't have to be a sphere collider. We can use a mesh collider instead. So I'll remove this component, and I'll actually add it to the rock child, because that means we can make use of the rock mesh as well. So I'll choose Add Component, make use of a Mesh Collider, and I'll check Convex because Unity needs that for physics to work properly. And we have a few, or quite a few settings for our movable pickup, but let's just see how it behaves right off the bat. And you can see it's fallen onto the desk. If I hover over it, I can hold down the cursor, and now I'm moving it around. And if I let go, I'll drop it. So let's fix a couple of things, or let's add a couple of more details. We want to make it so that our hotspot label appears at the bottom of the screen when we hover over it to let us know that we can interact with it. And let's make it also so that we can interact with it. We can rotate this rock. We can examine it from all sides when we pick it up. So in order to make this a hotspot, we just have to add the hotspot script. And adding a hotspot script doesn't mean that it becomes interactive in the usual sense. It just means that it has a label when we hover over it. So I've got to add component, and I've got the actual rock selected because the hotspot requires a collider, and this is where we have our collider. I've got to add component and add on the hotspot component. And as long as I don't add any use interactions or examine interactions or anything like that, it's not going to interfere with the behavior of the pickup. It's not going to start running any action lists or anything like that. Now if I go back to my pickup component, we've got various settings on what we can allow it. I'm going to allow rotation because I want to be able to examine it from all sides. So I'll check Allow Rotation. And in order to enable rotation mode, we need to invoke the Actually, I don't remember what it is, so we're going to the Settings Manager where they're listed, Available Inputs, and you can see we've got Rotate Movable as a button that's available to us. So let's add that into our Input Manager. I'll go to Edit, Project Settings, Input once more. I'll make a new input, and this one's going to be called Rotate Movable. And I'll make this mouse 1 as our positive button. This is all covered in the manual, by the way. You don't need to refer to the available inputs. Every section does tell you about the appropriate inputs for that particular part of AC. So let's try testing it now. We can walk over to it. When we hover over, we get the name of the object listed as a hotspot. I can pick it up, and if I hold down the right mouse button and move the mouse, I'm able to rotate it around. Now it seems a little bit too quick for me, so what I'm going to do is just reduce the rotation factor on it. If I go back to my pickup object, I'm going to reduce the rotation factor to about maybe 0.4, just a little bit under half of what it was. And that seems a little bit, actually that seems to be the inverse. Let me try something larger. Let me try 2, increase it from 1. Oh yeah, now it's moving a lot more slowly. Adventure Creator's physics system isn't limited to just picking things up. We can also use it to interact or drag around objects in a much more natural way with the mouse. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a cupboard here on the other side of the table that we can drag open using the mouse, as opposed to the drawers, which are just single clicks. So again, we can find a model for this in Physics Demo, Models, Table, and then Cupboard. If I drag that in, it's too big, so let's reduce the scale to 0.75 in all directions. And I'll place it like so. Now we're going to have to create a few more objects, and we need them all to be placed at this same position as the cupboard is. So before I do anything else, I'm going to copy the position as a transform. So I'm with the cupboard selected, I'm going to go to the transform component and click Copy Component. So we now need to make a draggable object. Just in the same way that we made our pickup object, I'm going to go to the Scene Manager and choose Draggable and make a new draggable object. And I'm going to position this at the exact same point as our cupboard. So I'm going to go again to the Transform component and choose Paste Component Values. And once again, I need to make our mesh a child of the AC prefab. So I'm going to get the cupboard and make it a child of Draggable. And just like with the pickup, it has a sphere collider, which we don't need. We just need a collider, as long as it's 3D. So I'll delete the sphere collider, and I'll get the cupboard, and instead add a box collider. And I'll check is trigger, just so that it doesn't get blocked by the player. Now, for a draggable object, we need one more thing, and that is a track. And a track allows us to dictate how that object is dragged. Is it moved along a plane? Is it moved around an axis? In the Scene Manager, we have 3 types of track. We have straight, curved, and hinge. We want this obviously to be on a hinge. It's going to be moving on its y-axis like so. So we're going to create a new hinge track. And when the game begins, our draggable is going to be connected to this hinge track, so it's going to take the same position and rotation. So again, we're going to make sure that this is placed at this same point. So I'm going to get its transform and choose paste component values. Now you can see that we have this little gizmo here. We've got a white curve with a white arc and a white disk and a grey disk at either end. Now the curve represents the motion that this cupboard will be able to take. It's rotated in the wrong direction at the moment because the grey represents the off position, or the shut position, the smallest amount that it can rotate. So if I just rotate it 180 degrees, I'll just type in 180, minus 180 into its rotation transform, and reduce the radius, you can start to see it making sense a little bit better. I'll increase the maximum angle, and so you can see this now shows you the amount of movement that this cupboard is going to be able to have. So if I go back to the draggable and find the movable drag component, we have our drag mode already set to lock to track, and the track to stick to is going to be this hinge track. So that means that it's going to have the same position and rotation as this hinge track, and is then going to be constrained in this way. So let's run that, see how we're doing. And you can see that we do have a problem as soon as we begin, and that is that the cupboard is rotating actually the wrong way. It's clipping through the wall, and it's being offset by 180 degrees. And that's because the hinge track and the draggable both have the same rotation now, whereas they probably didn't to begin with. If you remember, we had to rotate this 180 degrees. So what we need to do is simply offset this correction, or offset this rotation by making a correction to the cupboard mesh. So I'm just going to rotate this by 180 degrees, and I'll copy the transform, paste it back in when we stop playing the game, so that it looks offset when we're in the scene, when we're editing the scene, but when we run the game, the correction is made and it's now fine. So let's add another hotspot component, so we have a label for it. With the cupboard selected, I'm going to add the component hotspot, again with no interactions. And if I hold down the left mouse button and drag, I'm able to open the drawer. Now you'll see that I'm also free aiming. I'm also still looking around when I'm dragging, and depending on your tastes, you might not want that. I personally don't like that. So what I'm going to do is, in my settings manager, up in interface settings, I'm going to check disable free aim when moving draggables and pickups. So now when I hold down the mouse button over the cupboard, I'm now locked in rotation when I'm dragging around this cupboard. Now you can see by the movement of the mouse, it takes a little bit more effort than you'd think for the cupboard to open. And we can change all that by just tweaking the rigid body component. I can increase or decrease the mass to make it easier to move, like so. And let's also give it an icon at the point, like in 3D space, where we make contact with the cupboard, because that will make it easier to understand which direction we have to move the mouse in. So back to the movable drag component, where it says icon settings, I'm going to check icon at contact point. So now when I click and drag, oh actually I need to restart the scene for that. When I now click and drag, this use icon appears, and it just makes it a little easier for us to see where our hand, if you like, in 3D space is grabbing the cupboard. We're almost getting to the end of our game here. The last big thing we need to do is manage our saving and loading. Now, saving and loading through the default interface is done by pressing the escape key and going to either the save or load submenu. Now, Adventure Creator will always save everything that it knows it needs to. It knows it needs to save the state of your variables, your inventory, where the player is, what scene you're in, that sort of thing. But when it comes to specific game objects within your scene, we need to flag up what it is about these objects that we need saving. So for example, in the case of this sword that we were working on earlier, we have our sword hotspot and our sword mesh. Now the mesh we make invisible and the hotspot we deactivate. So we need to add the correct component to each of these game objects. And we can do that from Add Component, Adventure Creator, Save System, and then choose the right Remember component from this list to save a particular type of data. So in the case of the sword, we want to remember its visibility, so we're going to add the Remember Visibility component. Now, we have to do this for all such objects in our scene, or in fact our game, but there is a quick way we can do this. We can have Adventure Creator go through and automatically add what it thinks it needs to. And we can do this from the Settings Manager. Up at the top, underneath Save Game Settings, we have a button named Auto Add Save Components to Game Objects. Now you should back up your project beforehand because it is an automatic process. It goes through all of your scenes. But if I press OK and let it save, let's go back to the basement, and we'll find that in the case of the sword hotspot, it's gone and given it the Remember Hotspot script, which will ensure that the state of it is stored within save games. So it is a very automatic, a very convenient way of working, but it is important to understand what it's doing in case there's anything else that hasn't been picked up that you need to save. And that's usually going to be in the case of if you're working with, say, parameters, or there's some other type of data that isn't obvious to AC that needs saving. When it comes to making a first-person game in Unity, there are, of course, many other first-person assets out there. A key one being Ultimate FPS, which is a popular asset that allows you to have full body motion and weapons and so on. And if you want to use that with Adventure Creator, it's very simple. Adventure Creator comes with its own integration for that. Here I have UFPS already installed, and I can make use of the player prefabs that comes with it. I can find it, let's see, UFPS base, content, prefabs, and then players. We have a selection of player prefabs that we can use, but we have to convert them into something Adventure Creator can use. So I've got my character and controller prefab here. And what I'm going to do is add on the component UFPS integration. And that also adds on automatically the player and path script that Adventure Creator needs. But you'll find there is a little bit more to do when we run the game. You see it fails with a big error. We've got main camera has no main camera component. That can be solved by simply untagging the UFPS camera as main camera. That'll be set automatically by the UFPS script. And the other is Ultimate FPS is present is not listed in our scripting defined symbols. Now this is a way of allowing Adventure Creator to know that the code within this Ultimate FPS integration script is able to run. So we can add this condition by going to Edit, Project Settings, and then Player. And within Other Settings, we have a box called Scripting Defined Symbols. And if I type in Ultimate FPS is present, into the box, oh, if I can spell it right, is present, into the box, we'll have an updated build, the script is recompiling, and if I run the game, we'll see that I can now move using Ultimate FPS controls, but I still have access to Adventure Creator's interaction system. Now if we want to tweak the Ultimate FPS integration, the script is nicely laid out for us, it's very neat, it's commented, and so on. And the idea is that with something as complex as UFPS, it's not really possible to have an integration that covers any kind of game, any kind of condition that you wanted to have. So the idea behind this script is that it provides a very stable, basic integration between the two. And if you wanted to do more things, or if you wanted to do things slightly differently, then you can just duplicate the script and make the tweaks as necessary. And you can also use this as a basis for integration with your own FPS script or another FPS asset out there. So that's it for this tutorial. Again, if you want some further help on some of the more adventure-specific topics like hotspots and inventory, go and have a look at the 2D and 3D tutorials in particular.